welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. The evening sky was dyed a deep indigo as I pulled into the driveway, the gravel crunching under the tires of my car, a sound I found oddly comforting after a long day's work. It was only when I stepped out and caught the glint of the streetlight on the side of my car that I noticed it, a fresh dent, stark and accusing, marring the sleek silver finish. My heart sank. This car was not just a vehicle, but a cherished gift from my late father, kept pristine as a token of memory. The initial surge of annoyance gave way to curiosity. We lived in a quiet neighborhood where such incidents were rare, and I couldn't recall hearing any disturbances during the day. Determined to uncover the culprit, I headed straight to the living room where our home security system's monitor was set up. The security camera, strategically placed to overlook the driveway and street, would have the answers. I settled into the worn leather chair and began rewinding the footage, the mundane scenes of the day passing backward in a blur until something unexpected caught my eye. It wasn't just the impact of another car, a nondescript old sedan, that caused my brow to furrow. What unfolded next was a scene I could never have anticipated. The driver's door of the offending vehicle creaked open, and an elderly man emerged, steadying himself against the door as he got out. But what truly froze my blood was the sight of Linda, my wife of 15 years, hurrying out the front door towards him. There was a familiarity in her pace, a tenderness in her movements that I had not seen directed towards me in months. My breath hitched as I watched her take the old man's hand with affection, pulling him close for a kiss that was far too intimate for a mere friendly greeting. The shock of the betrayal sliced through me sharper than any physical wound could. Here was Linda, the woman I had loved and trusted, entwined in an affair so blatant yet so hidden until now. A flurry of emotions battered at me, anger, sadness, disbelief, all swirling into a dark vortex of betrayal. I sat there, motionless, the afterimage of Linda's betrayal searing my vision, until a cold resolve settled over my heart. Revenge, a path I had never imagined treading, now seemed the only avenue left to reclaim some semblance of my shattered dignity. I knew then what had to be done. I would ensure that Linda's actions would not just go unanswered but would cost her dearly. The next few days were a haze of legal consultations and quiet plotting. The divorce papers were drafted with a clinical precision that belied the turmoil within me. Linda's face when she was served was a mix of shock and realization, as if she had stepped out of one secret life into another, harsher reality. Her pleas for forgiveness, her attempts at explaining, none of it could sway me from my course. We divorced swiftly, and in the aftermath, our paths never crossed again. But as I sit now, replaying that fateful footage in the solitude of my emptied house, a part of me wonders about the cost of such revenge. The house feels larger, the nights longer, and the victory, if it could be called that, hollow and cold. The crisp air of early morning did little to clear the fog of unrest that had settled over me since the revelation. With the divorce finalized and the house now echoing a stark emptiness, I found myself aimlessly wandering through the rooms, each corner a reminder of a life that was no longer mine. It was during one of these restless mornings that a knock on the door jolted me from my reverie. I opened the door to find Jack, Linda's brother, standing on the porch, his face a mask of concern mixed with a hesitancy that hinted at the awkwardness of his visit. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low, almost apprehensive. "Sure," I said, stepping aside to let him in. The living room felt colder than usual as we sat across from each other, the space between us laden with unspoken tension. Jack rubbed his hands together, then looked up at me with earnest eyes. "I heard about everything. I'm sorry, man. I didn't see this coming. Linda's changed these past years, but I never." "Neither did I, Jack." "Neither did I interrupted, the bitterness in my voice sharper than I intended. I leaned forward, my hands clasped tightly. "What do you want?" He hesitated, his eyes shifting away before meeting mine again. "I think you deserve the whole story. It's about the man, the one from the video." His name is George, and he's not just some random guy. The mention of George's name tightened the knot in my stomach. Go on, I prompted, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Jack sighed, a long, weary exhalation. He's our father, mine and Linda's. He walked out when we were kids, and Linda found him a year ago. She never told me, just started seeing him. I swear, I didn't know she'd hide it like this or what it looked like. The revelation struck me like a physical blow. The affair wasn't an affair, but a reunion hidden in shadows and lies. The complexity of my emotions teetered on the edge of anger and an aching sorrow for the life Linda must have lived, grappling with the abandonment and the secret reunification. So, you're saying she wasn't cheating? I murmured, the words tasting foreign on my tongue. Not in the way you think. It was wrong, how she did it, but... No, Jack. It was betrayal all the same, I cut in sharply. She lied. She made her choice. Jack nodded slowly, the lines of his face deepening with sadness. What will you do now? He asked, a note of caution in his voice. A cold clarity settled over me. I start over. But first, I need to see him, George. I need to hear it from him. Are you sure that's wise? Jack's voice was laced with concern. It's not about wisdom, Jack. It's about closure, I said, standing up to signal the end of the conversation. Thank you for telling me. I'll handle it from here. After Jack left, I spent the day making arrangements. Each step was calculated, leading me towards the inevitable confrontation with George. The evening found me outside a quaint little house on the outskirts of the city, the garden wilting under the weight of neglect. I approached the door, my heart pounding, not with fear but with a resolute need to face the past that had unwittingly destroyed my present. As the door swung open, revealing a frail old man with eyes too similar to Linda's, I knew this meeting would change the course of my path. Not just a confrontation, but a chance to understand the depths of deception and maybe, to glimpse the possibility of forgiveness. George? I said, my voice steady. We need to talk. As the door widened, the chill of the evening seemed to pause, the next words ready to tip the scales of fate. George's house smelled of old books and stale air, a testament to years of solitude and the slow tick of time. He motioned for me to come in, his movements hesitant, as if the weight of his past and present were too much to bear. The door clicked shut behind me, and the silence that followed was palpable. Thank you for seeing me, I began, my voice calm but firm. George nodded, his eyes wary. I figured you'd come eventually. Jack told me about the divorce. I'm sorry for your pain. His apology hung in the air, a fragile thing against the backdrop of my turmoil. I took a deep breath, readying myself for what needed to be said. Why didn't Linda tell me about you? Why hide it all? The questions poured out, each one laced with a mix of anger and a desperate need for understanding. George walked slowly towards an old, overstuffed armchair and sank down into it. Linda was scared, he started, his voice frail. When she found me, I wasn't well. The doctors, they said it wasn't long. She didn't want to burden you or disrupt your lives with the shadows of my mistakes. I processed his words, the implications making my heart heavy. So, she decided to lie. To sneak around as if she was committing a sin. It wasn't like that, not to her. She was trying to protect you, to protect everyone from more pain. George's defense of Linda, while feeble, sparked a flare of frustration within me. And what about my pain? What about the betrayal I felt? I shot back, unable to keep the bitterness from seeping through. George met my gaze, his eyes reflecting a sorrow born of too many years and too many regrets. I am truly sorry. If I could change how this all came out, I would. But I can't. All I can do is ask your forgiveness, not just for myself but for Linda too. The room fell silent as I considered his words. The part of me that craved retribution wanted to reject his plea, to walk away and never look back. But another part, perhaps the part that still remembered the good times with Linda before the deceit, felt a pull towards resolution. I came here for answers, and I got them, I said slowly. But forgiveness, that'll take time. For both of you. George nodded, the lines on his face deepening. Of course. That's all we can ask for. As I stood to leave, a small photograph on a side table caught my eye. It was a picture of Linda and George, her smile bright and carefree, a stark contrast to the complexities of our current reality. It was a reminder that behind every deceit, there was a human story, often filled with more shades of gray than clear-cut truths. Take care, George, I said without looking back. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, the burden of my anger felt lighter. The road to forgiveness seemed long and uncertain, but for the first time since the ordeal began, the path forward also seemed possible. Driving back home, the city lights blurred into streaks of color. I realized that this confrontation was not just about facing George or Linda's deceit, it was about confronting my own capacity for forgiveness and change. And as the skyline stretched out before me, I felt a resolve strengthening within me, not just to overcome the betrayal, but to rebuild a life marked not by revenge, but by resilience and perhaps, eventually, reconciliation. The weeks following my meeting with George were steeped in a cold deliberation. The hurt from Linda's betrayal, now mingled with the complex sorrow of George's revelation, brewed a tempest within me. I could not shake the sense of being wronged, and the desire for a final, settling retribution grew stronger with each passing day. One chilly evening, I decided it was time to act, to close this chapter of my life in a way that would leave no doubts, no possibility of reconciliation. I had learned from a mutual friend that Linda was hosting a gathering at our former home, celebrating her newfound freedom. It was the perfect moment for my plan to unfold. I arrived at the house under the cover of darkness, the familiar sights and sounds sharpening my resolve. The laughter and music floating through the air felt like a mockery of the life we once shared. I slipped into the garage, where I knew the circuit breaker was located. My hands were steady as I switched off the main power supply, plunging the house into darkness and silence. Confusion and surprised shouts filled the air. I used my knowledge of the house to navigate through the dark, making my way to the backyard where I knew Linda would eventually come to investigate the outage. Linda! I called out, my voice cutting through the murmur of uneasy guests. She appeared from around the corner, a flashlight in her hand, her expression a mix of annoyance and fear. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice trembling slightly. "This ends tonight, Linda." "The lies, the deceit, all of it," I said, stepping closer. "You have no right to be here. This is my home now. Leave." Her words were sharp, but her voice cracked, betraying her fear. "This was our home, and you turned it into a house of lies." I countered, my anger boiling over. "You chose to deceive, to betray not just me but the memory of what we had. And for what? A man who left you as a child." Linda's face paled, and her next words came out in a whisper. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I was wrong, but can't you see it was out of pain, not malice?" "Pain? You don't get to speak to me of pain." I snapped. In a sudden, blind fury, I grabbed the flashlight from her hands and hurled it into the swimming pool. The splash echoed loudly in the sudden hush that had fallen over the backyard. The guests, drawn by the commotion, watched in stunned silence. Linda stared at me, her eyes wide with shock and something else, fear, perhaps regret. "There's no turning back from this, Linda. We are done. Forever." My voice was cold, devoid of the warmth it once held for her. Linda's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, she looked older, defeated. "I'm sorry," she murmured, almost to herself. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the darkness. The sound of my footsteps on the gravel felt final, a punctuation to the end of our shared story. The next morning, the news came. In her distraught state, Linda had taken a drastic step. The betrayal and my revenge had driven her to the edge, and she had not stepped back. The news shattered something within me. The victory I had sought felt hollow, tainted by the stark reality of its consequences. As I stood by her grave a few days later, the autumn wind whispered through the trees, a quiet reminder of the transience of life and the harsh truths of our choices. Linda was gone, our past irretrievable, and the future a blank slate marred by the scars of our actions. I walked away from the cemetery, the leaves crunching underfoot, a changed man. The weight of my revenge bore down on me, a cruel reminder that in my quest to right a wrong, I had lost a part of myself too. And that was a loss I would carry, alone and unshared, as I moved through the empty days ahead.